Shalom from Jerusalem. I'm Jonathan Hessen, and this is TV7's Daily Update. And in today's edition, we'll focus on the latest developments with the United States, of course, conducting a second night of strikes overnight, during the course of which they launched over 40 Tomahawk missiles from various platforms, degrading many targets throughout Iran, particularly adjacent to the Strait of Hormuz and areas which have to do with the Iranian capacity to launch attacks against commercial vessels transiting through the strategic waterway. Nevertheless, it seems like President Trump is still not happy with the fact that the Iranians continue to defiantly claim that they are the ones that have been violated. They're the ones who have not received the better end of the equation, so to speak, which may be true, but nonetheless, it's not about whether or not they're happy with the outcome of this campaign. It's whether or not they're willing to continue to get hurt quite severely. And at this moment in time, we are seeing that the blockade on the Iranians is really starting to cause pressures inside the Islamic Republic, with the Ayatollah regime ordering multiple attacks against Bahrain, Kuwait, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, which saw another barrage or salvo rather of ballistic missiles, some 20 of them getting into their airspace. All of those were intercepted, thankfully, but nonetheless, before we deliberate the latest, including the derivatives thereof, the situation in Lebanon, as well as the strategic strait of Bab el-Mandeb and the adjacent country of Yemen, let's introduce our experts for today, to include retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmit, who formerly served as an Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, as well as a CENTCOM officer in planning and other senior positions. It's great having you with us, sir.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Also joining us is Brigadier General in Reserve, Brig Shafir, formerly an Israeli Air Force commander, as well as a fighter pilot, among others. It's a pleasure having you with us as well, General.
Thank you.
And let's dive right into it. President Trump has just released another tweet a couple of hours ago, roughly 2 hours ago, during the course of which he wrote the following: "The United States will be hitting Iran, whose Navy, Air Force, radar, anti-aircraft, and all forms, or rather all other forms of defense, together with most of its offensive capability, are gone very hard tonight," indicating yet another night of strikes. At some point in the not-too-distant future, we will be looking at taking Hog Island and other oil infrastructure points and assume total control of their oil and gas markets, much like what we have done in Venezuela, he continues. This seems to be a clear case of escalation dominance, where the Iranian doctrine of A2AD, namely anti-access area denial, that has worked for them initially, is starting to falter. General Kimmit?
Well, first of all, I think we've got to understand that we're really not trying to do escalation dominance as much as we're trying to do coercive diplomacy. It's clear that the president believes the rug has been pulled out from under him a number of times. You remember the old Peanuts cartoon where Lucy would always pull the football away from Charlie Brown. I think the president, who has been saying time after time after time, we're 2 to 3 days away from a good deal, really has not got into the head and the understanding of the Iranian negotiating style, where you'll get them right up to the edge and then they'll pull back and they'll say, well, we need another 7 days to consider this. We need to talk to our leadership. That is just the manner in which the Iranians negotiate. Now, since we don't like that style of negotiations, we're going to use our own method of negotiations, coercive diplomacy, which is, if you don't want to give us an answer with a smile on your face, you'll give us an answer with a frown on your face. And we're going to use military capabilities to bring you back to the negotiating table, very similar, if not identical to what we did in 1972 in Vietnam, when the North Vietnamese negotiators walked away from the table and Operation Linebacker 2 for 18 days continued nonstop bombing missions on Hanoi and Haiphong. And at the end of that, the negotiators came back. I don't know if history is prelude, but it certainly does look like that is what they're trying to do.
General Shafir, I'd like to hear your take on this. Also, from an Israeli perspective, naturally, Israel has been, albeit a secondary role to the United States in this campaign against the Islamic Republic, to compel it to forego its malign aspirations, to include the attainment of nuclear weapon capabilities, ballistic missile, oversaturation, and the establishment of overmatch against Israeli defenses and those of its partners in the region, and of course its various proxies in the region that have been continuously attacking Israel since October 7th in a very direct manner. It's not part of the current equation of the coercive diplomacy, as General Kimmit just mentioned, but rather it is a lot more focused on the Iranian proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon, really ratcheting up the number of various operational endeavors to include aerial strikes and other type of operations in the field, putting this Iranian proxy on the back burner and really against a wall.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. We're opting, we Israelis are opting continuously on the kinetic options rather than using diplomacy or other means. And this had worked for quite a while, but in order to achieve what we want in the North was a complete cessation of hostilities from the Lebanese war machine, if you may call it, by Hezbollah, it'll take a lot more than what we're doing. This is something which is causing a lot of frustration in Israel and to the government, who doesn't have other means to coerce the Hezbollah deal. So we have to sit back and actually wait to see what the outcome of the deal with Iran is. And the proxy part may not even be part of the deal. And that is unnerving the Israeli public and government. So we are trying to leverage what we can, but unfortunately at this time, the United States would rather go it alone than have Israel for reasons that we can discuss later. So at this time, we're limited in what we can do in Lebanon, and we'll just have to watch and see how the current outcome of the pressure by the United States, the coercive pressure mentioned before. I'll also mention that the past Vietnam Accords, as was mentioned, was an idea, a Kissinger idea of how to make a deal, which is continue kinetic bombing through the deal. And this is exactly what the president is doing at the moment. The other side is playing for time, because the thinking of the Eastern thinking is so much different from the Western thinking that there's a clash of civilizations here in understanding what each side is saying, what it's doing, and how close is it to its deadline in the sense of making changes. So this is something worth discussing at this time.
If I may stay with you for a second, General Shafir, since I agree that there might be cultural differences and there is a sense of a clash of civilizations when we're talking about the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And Israel also, within this context, is neither American nor Iranian, culturally speaking, albeit a country with many Persians living here and many Americans, even more than the smallest states currently in the United States. with more than 500,000, and some say even 700,000 Americans living here. But nonetheless, the kinetic language, the language of violence, is universal. And that is something that both sides do understand, and there are various complexities related to that. With that being said, specifically, when we're looking on the engagement against Hezbollah, yes, Israel is still very much engaged against this Iranian proxy kinetically, but it is also in parallel negotiating with the Lebanese government. And it seems like there is some sort of breakthrough, albeit not yet publicly acknowledged, when we're talking about Beirut and Washington and Jerusalem collaborating on potentially seeing a better future for both countries, and ultimately also ensuring the decoupling between Iran and Lebanon, with the Ayatollah regime, of course, holding its way over this country for far too long.
Well, yes, we're supposedly trying, but it took a coercion by the United States to bring the Israeli and the Lebanese ambassadors to speak in Washington. This is considered a low-level deliberations and not something between Israeli government and the Lebanese government. And so Israel was not in a position, or at least that's what the Prime Minister thought, to have direct talks with Lebanon, even though Lebanon requested this quite a while ago. But we do understand that their ability to force Hezbollah to their line of thinking is very limited. So Hezbollah are holding on quite well in Lebanon. We're limited in what we can do in Lebanon. Perhaps the Syrians could be helpful here. And I think President Trump doesn't really care much about what goes on between Israel and Lebanon. And I am afraid that part of the Iranian part of the deal is to put everything on the nuclear question and leave other things aside so they don't have to give in either on their ballistic missile system development or their proxies. And at the end of the day, we're talking about an improved Obama type of deal, where the question of how long they have to refrain from developing their nuclear capability is between 10 to 20 years. So this is where they're taking it. And I guess eventually they'll cave in, leaving the other questions open and tiring the American side to leave it on its own and be content with the nuclear part.
Well, again, I don't think it's necessarily a low-level diplomatic engagement between Washington and Jerusalem, considering that on the Israeli side, since strategic minister Ron Dermer left the equation, Yechiel Leiter, the Israeli ambassador to Washington, has become a very prominent figure in Netanyahu's inner circles. And looking at the other side, we are seeing Simon Karam and the ambassador of Lebanon to Washington, Nada Hamadeh, being very close figures to the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, having also good ties, of course, with Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, and looking also from an American perspective, the American ambassador to Lebanon, Michel Issa, has very close ties with President Trump. He has President Trump's ear, and it's not just him who got involved there. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who also serves as Trump's national security advisor, led the negotiations more than once. I mean, how high can it go beyond that? So from that perspective, again, I'm more optimistic about the seriousness of all sides. Whether or not this will reflect on the impact on the ground and the situation vis-a-vis Hezbollah, I'm more skeptical there. But nonetheless, it made more headway than what most people expected in the first place, and that is something that needs to be taken into account. Now, with regard to your remark on Syria, I think it's better to leave Syria out of it, since this will unite the Lebanese against the Syrians and rather create more problems for everyone rather than solve the issues. General Kimmit, I'd like to bring you into this conversation. To what degree do you see the American resolve? And we're seeing that President Trump is actually following through time and again on his pledges to use kinetic force as part of that coercive diplomacy, which you mentioned. But he also seems to want to establish escalation dominance. And that is something that may break the barrier of this. I don't know if it's a ceasefire at this point or not, but it's a temporary cessation of hostilities with a lot of fire taking place on all accounts. Do you see this jumping into that renewed hostilities phase on a high intensity level?
Well, I'm afraid it could, and I think that would be a waste of time and a waste of precious ammunition because, again, we're mistaking the fact that somehow military success will lead to strategic success, and it won't. Look, we're very good at busting things. I mean, this is the old shock and awe that I hear from all the Air Force guys all the time, that somehow we're going to achieve strategic victory by dropping bombs. It just doesn't work. We know it doesn't work because we're trying to fight a war of annihilation. That's the standard way of describing this. By contrast, the Iranians are fighting a war of exhaustion. They're just trying to wear us out. They see themselves as Rocky in the great fight. They don't have to win. They just have to be standing at the end of those 15 rounds. They can be bleeding. They can be completely wobbly at the knees. But as long as they are standing, they think they have won. They have won because they have resisted. And so I think they will continue to do this resistance model for a long, long time because they believe they can hold out longer than President Trump's patience would indicate. Now, really kind of irritates me because I thought the president was on the right track early on where he said, we've got patience. Hegseth said, we've got patience. We can do this as long as we need to. But the moment they started putting timelines on this, I think the Iranians said, yeah, now we've got them. They want it quick, and we can outweight them.
Gerald, you're an artilleryman. Your father is a famous artilleryman who launched the most ammunitions in a single battle during the Korean War, among others. Artillery has won battles, quite significant battles, some in the Civil War, of course, in the United States and in Europe in multiple occasions. The battle for Constantinople was essentially won by the Turks or the Ottomans back in the day with artillery, and I can go on and on. Aircraft are merely an alternative means for delivery, and there are historical precedents for the capacity to win such a war. The fact of the matter is, however, and I do agree with you, this is merely one tool in a toolbox of a whole of government approach that needs to exploit the challenges at hand. But the Iranians seem to not necessarily be at the weak point that may be tilted to the advantage of the United States when we're talking about diplomacy.
Yeah, let's sort of use it in the calculus that a first-year war college student would. They learn about this thing called DIME, all the elements of national power, diplomatic, information, military, economic, and then everybody wants to add other initials, but those are the primary ones. Let's go down those right now. Economic, clearly we're winning that war. Military, clearly we're winning that war. Information, clearly we're losing that war. And diplomacy, I think right now the Iranians have the edge. So if they think about their elements of national power the way we do, and we are looking for total victory, and they're simply looking at being able to be standing the way Hassan Nasrallah was at the end of 2000 after you all pulled out, and he declared victory even though there was nothing left to declare victory except rubble. If you understand that, the Iranians think they're in pretty good position if their goal is to simply win by not losing.
I appreciate that position, and of course, within that context, the same school of thought that is taught both in West Point and elsewhere, they also highlight within various military philosophers over the years that you should double down on the areas in dime that you are actually winning in order to reposition yourself in the locations where you're somewhat weaker. So there is merit for reestablishing a kinetic campaign in high intensity until a point where the information war, which the Iranians continue to claim that they're winning the military and the economic fronts, here they can also be caught in their lie and be quite embarrassed and lose the narrative, so to speak. Now, a regime falls when it falls, and we don't know whether or not regime collapse is imminent. We do know that they are not in a good position. In that context, General Shafir, I'd like to ask you, and we don't have very much time left, but nonetheless, Israel does view the best option for a change in the regime in order to bring a reform of sorts within Iran towards no longer pursuing their malign aspirations of annihilating the state of Israel. Is that something still on the table in your understanding of the current state of play?
Well, there was some talk about Ahmadinejad being brought forth as a leader, even though he was very anti-Israeli, but he was more logical. But that was put off the table. I think we were too hopeful that pressure from the Kurds on the one hand and the few tricks that we had up our sleeve would collapse the Iranian regime. But I think they had made a move in January by killing about 30,000 of their own people in Tehran in the uprising at the beginning of the year, by bringing in Afghan soldiers to fire from the rooftops, the snipers, to shoot at the civilians, which is their way of saying what the Russians used to do is put the soldiers from the east in the west and people from the west in the east, so they have no feelings towards the civilians in that area. So I think we underestimated their ability to think ahead and plan their positioning and holding on to power. So I think that these options were actually put off the table at this time. And with the Mossad and the Prime Minister understanding that it wasn't really in the game to begin with, and the fact that all the Iranians had to do was warn the Kurds that they would make Erbil rubble, that they put down their arms. And so I think that some new thinking has to come along because the old ones didn't work.
Well, as we know, that we know what we know, we sometimes don't know what we know. We certainly don't know what we don't know. And in most cases, those type of clandestine operations are far from the eye of the public. And in this context also, everything that is publicized is usually things that will not necessarily materialize. So we'll have to wait and see how those things evolve. General Kimmit, you have roughly 1 minute and 15 seconds for your closing argument, statement, analysis. Go ahead.
It's not over. We've got a long way to go. There's not going to be an agreement in the next 3 days. There's more fighting to do, more diplomacy to do. It took 7 years to get an agreement out of the North Korean, out of the Vietnamese. I would expect it's going to take quite a bit of time before we get something out of the Iranians.
General Shafir?
I hope the general is wrong, And at least on the nuclear issue, we can get something fast by economic choking. We'll see how President Trump, who's not your usual leader, takes this, and whether he can really bring a shock and awe statement to the Straits of Hormuz.
It does seem that when we really try to dissect the latest state of play, the United States still has much to do, and Israel is aching to get into this fight. I know many of officers who have been planning for a long time to launch a very significant strike to deal with the Iranians are at standby, and they're hoping that America will allow them to get involved within the context of course, CENTCOM is taking the lead, and therefore the moment in time when the Iranians lose the narrative, so to speak, where they continue to defiantly push back on any diplomatic breakthrough, it seems that we are heading to yet another round of high-intensity warfare, in contrast to what we're seeing right now, and this is very low-intensity warfare. But with that, I'd like to thank General Shafir and General Kimmit for all of your insights today, and to thank you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.